Right, hello everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Thinking Aloud. Today, we're going to be discussing: is photorealism art? We are waiting for somebody, but for the time being, we're just going to begin with the four of us: Evelyn, Theo, and Tim Ruswick, who is our special guest this week, founder of Game Dev Underground, absolute legend. So the first thing I suppose we should probably ask is what does art mean to each of us? So Evelyn, begin with you. What does art mean to you?
I think that art can be anything, but a lot of the time for me art is different ways of interpreting concepts in real life and like showing that through
Hello.
like different expressions.
Sorry, Stephen. Welcome. We just began a few minutes ago, but it doesn't matter. We're just going through what art means to each of us. Evelyn, did you have anything else to say?
No, that was it.
No. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. Thank you, Stephen. What does art mean to you?
Well, art is something that you can recognize. For example, let's say you see a painting, and if you like the painting, you will probably remember who painted it if you look it up.
Theo, what does art mean to you?
I believe art is an expression. In that way, almost anything can be or considered art. So, in that way, anything from someone kicking a football in a special way, that's art. Someone making a model out of sticks that looks like a beautiful woman can be considered art. It's how you express yourself through different mediums.
Interesting. That's a good idea. Yeah. So Tim, what does art mean to you?
I would probably be along the similar lines. I think art is something that makes you feel something. Something that somebody creates that makes other people feel something.
Yeah.
One argument that I heard recently was that photorealism isn't art. And the reason is because if somebody is talented enough to create a piece of extremely photorealistic art, it's no different from a photograph, or it's no different from real life. So you can't really interpret something from it. You can't, you might as well have not done it, right? So art should be something that can inspire you and that you can interpret and that you haven't really seen before.
The problem with saying something like that is if you then say that photorealism isn't art because it's as good as a photo, that means you can't have people who do a photography degree have that as a Bachelor of Arts, because at the end of the day, they're expressing themselves through photographs and they consider photography art. Why not photorealism?
It's interesting you mentioned that though, because when I first heard about the subject, I thought the question was, are photos art? And I thought that was really interesting because, like, okay, on one end of the spectrum, you have people that go through painstaking amounts, buy expensive cameras, spend hours framing their shot to get the perfect feeling, and then on the other hand, you got people with smartphones that just hit a button and it captures a thing. So I think that's an interesting question. Photorealism, I think, is a little bit easier for me. I think if someone can recreate life on a page or in a painting, I think that's just as much art as anything else. It takes a lot of skill, but I think it's just as much art.
I think what matters is what you make in a photorealistic style. For example, let's say you 3D scan a real object, for example, let's say an AK-47, then that's, I think, less artistic than, let's say, creating a prop of a sci-fi firearm that doesn't really exist and then scanning that.
Yeah, I get your point actually.
So you think it's more artistic to create something that doesn't exist than to copy something that does?
Yes.
See, I would argue that we don't really create anything. We just kind of remix things from our experiences.
But I also think because art is so subjective that like you can't really decide when something isn't art, because something might move someone and someone else might not feel anything from it. Do you know what I mean? It's entirely subjective.
You know, I used to have an artist friend that he would paint these weird creatures, and he was a really popular artist in LA, and he would paint these weird creatures, and he would take like newspaper clippings and he would put them into the painting, And I asked him one time, I was like, what does this mean? And he started laughing and he says it means whatever people think it mean. And he would sell these paintings for thousands of dollars. And I would go to his galleries and I would see these people would look at these newspaper clippings and they would see something about like some fire or something, and they would feel like, oh, this is about a fire and about how you feel about losing a childhood home or something, right? In reality, he didn't. He just put a bunch of paper and news clippings on it, and he let them figure it out. But to them, it meant something. So, like, I guess that would be an interesting question too. Is like, does the artist or the designer even need to have the intention to make somebody feel something to create art?
Exactly, like, can it not just be something that you created? It doesn't necessarily have to be like conceptual or have like actual meaning behind it. It's whatever you interpret it to be.
Yeah.
Does that take away from people who do put a lot of effort into the art they create? Because if somebody can just create anything and it's art, does that take away from the people who spend years on a canvas or years trying to find the perfect photograph spot? What do you think?
Not at all. I believe that if someone can, spend so long doing something, say if I see something that looks like a photo, then someone tells me, no, that was drawn or painted, I instantly respect that person a lot more. As I said, there's different forms of art. I believe a barber is an artist who uses his artistry to make functional money to make people's lives better. And a good barber has spent a lot of time honing his craft and becoming better at what he does. The same way a good photorealistic artist would have spent hours, maybe days or weeks creating one piece of art in order to make someone feel some type of way, rather than maybe someone who's just, I don't know, splashed something on paint and then said that's art. In my opinion, I respect that a tiny bit less because not as much effort has gone into it as compared to someone who's taken so long to produce something so, well, to me anyway, so good.
Is it more respectable to create something photorealistic or to put a lot of time and effort into something than it is to, so like Tim, with your friend, is it more respectable? Do you know people who put a lot of time into things, and do you respect them more than your friend?
I don't really think it matters. I think like I made a game called Philophobia, the fear of love, right? It's about breakup and deep dark feelings and stuff. And then there are people that like say, okay, I'm going to experience this thing based on that lens, right? That, oh, this is made out of a guy's deep dark emotions, right? That, okay, so when I go through this thing, whoa, like he put all of his emotions in this game. But then there are people that are just like, oh, it's a platformer, and it's okay, it's fun, I can jump here and there. I think they both experience art, but they experience it through different lenses. So like I may have had an intention when I created this thing, right? For me, it was more about pouring my negative emotions in this thing, but for other people, it's more about, I got 2 hours to kill. How can I, do that?
Yeah.
I don't think that takes away from it. I just think people are only really capable of seeing things through their own lens in their own way. And I think good art can make a lot of people feel things, whether they're completely different things or whether it's a lot of people feeling the same thing,
Yeah.
But then if I was to ask you, Tim, you said good art. What would you consider good art?
Yeah, see, now let me back up and not say that. Yeah, see, that's a whole nother, especially with games, dude, right? Like you have people that are like, oh, that's a Unity asset flip. But what if that's some 12-year-old kid that poured all of his time into this thing and he's incapable of making a model, so he got assets and he made the best thing that he possibly could, right? Is that still a Unity asset flip? Like that's a good question.
Yeah,
that's like getting into like, are cloned humans human?
Oh no.
Next week's question. No. So sort of going on from there. So should people strive to create things that are more surreal and more that make less sense and that are more open to interpretation, or should people sort of aim to create things? Because for video games is an interesting interesting point to bring up, because video game graphics are constantly moving towards looking real, like photorealism. But actually, should they take a more traditional art approach and go for some more, abstract kind of thing, or and it doesn't have to be video games, it could be paintings as well. Which way should people go?
I just think it just depends on what kind of mood you're trying to achieve, or what kind of, because do you know what I mean?
I think if you're talking about video games, it might depend on the game you're going for. For example, if you're the director of EA, EA Sports that is, and you're trying to make Madden or FIFA better, I think stuff like creating better, more realistic, more human-looking graphics is really beneficial, because you're trying to immerse people into the game. So they're never ever going to be as good as Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo. So in that way, you're trying to make the experience of playing these players better. It's why they've taken great thanks into getting the face capture stuff, so you can see their face better, and they've even started capturing their movements. So the way that Ronaldo runs in real life, they capture it and they put it into the video game, so it looks and feels like you're actually playing him. Now, if you were to substitute it to something like I don't know, a abstract third-person shooter involving aliens or whatever, you can go crazy, because none of that's real, and you're not trying to make someone feel like they're an alien, hunting monster, because none of that's real. So you can really go to the town, and the art style you're choosing, and the character graphics, you make it even look like a comic if you wanted to.
Yeah,
it's interesting. So and Tim, with your game, do you feel like it would have been better, quote unquote, if you'd gone for more realistic artwork, or did you just
I think that game would have been terrifying if it was realistic. I'm glad it's not. Like, I think that's one of the advantages of not going photorealistic, is you can get away with a lot. Like, the game's got suicide and hell and all kinds of stuff in it, right?
Oh,
but
yeah.
It's got these cute little characters, so it's like, oh, okay. Like, it's not. It takes away some of the emotional power, and I think that's intentional, right?
Yeah, like William, if you think about Flambeau, that has a lot of dark concepts that probably wouldn't get away with if it was super realistic, hyper realistic.
Yes.
And that art style, the style that it's in, makes it takes that power away from it, but also makes it more powerful somehow. I think
it's more accessible, and I think you get the message across. I also think with like simpler stuff, you can deliver clearer messages. Like, if you take a face, right? If you show a picture of someone's face, or a photorealistic drawing of somebody's face, it may not always be easy to understand how that person's feeling. But if you have just a simple face with a few basic shapes, you can exaggerate different things to oh, that person's crying, that person's sad, that person's happy. So you can get those things across.
This is why, in certain ways, animation in film is a lot better than a live action depiction. A perfect example for me personally, one of my favorite Disney film of all time, The Lion King, I felt was butchered last summer, because
that's a good point.
Watching a live action lion speaking, I mean, when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, watching Narnia, that felt okay. Then constantly seeing it with a lion talking to a lion, you can't see emotion, whereas in a cartoon they can show a lion smiling, even though that in real life they can't. So that's why I felt Lion King, going down the hyper realistic route, felt less genuine than watching The Lion King from 1994, which was very cartoony and very well, it wasn't realistic, and that was a good thing, because you could portray emotions, whereas you can't do that with animal faces.
Yeah, I think that's a great example.
Yeah, it is.
Photorealism. You got a cartoon, you got a photorealistic version of it.
And with photorealism, you also have a huge drawback, because, for example, take something like System Shock 2 from 1999. It's an old game, but I think it still looks okay. because it's not realistic. If you see a screenshot of System Shock, then you immediately know what it is. But let's say a photorealistic game from 5 years ago is going to look bad because
Yeah.
the graphics have evolved and it's not the same anymore.
Yeah, it's like when something's less photorealistic, I guess it sort of ages better and will always kind of still be seen as artistic instead of just like bad graphics like in the future.
Would we argue that photorealism therefore probably has less artistic value?
Or less artistic impact, but it depends. Again, it just depends.
That's a good way of putting it. Right.
You could say that the artistic value of graphics is determined by how good it looks, and if you are going for a style, then it stays good, but photorealism graphics loses its artistic value when it gets outdated.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I don't necessarily think it impacts the art though, because like let's say somebody draws a photorealistic drawing of some horrific event or somebody's face during like the the Holocaust or something like that.
Yeah.
Right. They can still create scenarios and situations and emotional impact that's fictional, but they can depict it in a realistic way. In some cases, maybe even so much to make you feel more like, oh wow, that's a person in that scenario, right? Where they can humanize things that we might read about in textbooks and never really give a thought to. I think it's a complicated subject. I would definitely say that photorealism is definitely art, but I also think it's one of the hardest things to ever pull off. And as a fellow artist, I respect an artist that can do that much more. Watching them do it.
But the thing you've said is that with the Holocaust scenario, it's fictional.
This is Will speaking from editing here, so I've just paused the podcast here just for a minute, just to say that nobody is saying that the Holocaust is fictional. Just in case it comes across like that to anybody, that would just be a miscommunication of language and just what people are saying, but that is not at all what is being said.
The emphasis isn't on the art style, it's the thing it tries to convey. If you are talking about game graphics, then let's say you scan an AK-47, because that's a good example.
You really like that gun, don't you?
Then just that a 3D model won't have any meaning. It's just an object, and if you add something to it, for example, it's modified with optics, or it's burnt, or it's painted with some type of sign of, I don't know, a rebel resistance.
Yeah.
Then it's still photorealistic, but it's not just a copy of an object. It has something.
I agree. Actually, I see your point exactly.
Well, I'm going to try and wrap things up, but I think it's been a very interesting talk. I
actually think everyone made some really good points.
Yeah, and everyone contributed, and it was really, really good. So hopefully you guys have found some inspiration in there somewhere, or something to take away from it and think about. That is the point after all. So I suppose to conclude, therefore, we could say that although photorealism... Well, actually, somebody else maybe conclude. What have we sort of come to?
I think photorealism is art. So yes, it is art. Is it the best form of art? At times, no. In most cases, no. It's the hardest to actually convey any form of meaning behind, because if you were to get something that's photorealistic, it could look very appealing, but does it have any meaning behind it? That's the biggest question that is still yet to be answered.
Yeah. Brilliant, fantastic.
It's the difference between a product and something with a meaning behind it. For example, when the the taking a photo example was that you set up a nice picture. But if you are just, again, copying something, then it's just a product and not really something with a meaning behind it.
That's a great way to put it. Well, brilliant. Thank you all for joining me and contributing, and everyone. Hopefully, everyone had a decent time. And I, again, just for the people watching, I will post next week's question on Instagram and on my personal Instagram as well, just to keep people updated. So if you have an opinion you'd like to feature on next week's cast, and of course anybody here is welcome to return for next week if you feel so inclined. But yeah, no, brilliant. So thanks, guys, and I think I'll end it there. If anyone's got anything else to say,
It was fun. Thanks for having me.
that's it. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Cool. No
Take
worries.
care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Ciao.